Hi there, and welcome back to another biology exam prep session. I'm Lenata Cowie-Clark, your teacher for today, and remember that these lessons are brought to you by the Division of Education, Innovation and Energy e-learning program. It is said that the eyes are the windows to the soul. Well, I don't know what these eyes are saying, but they do belong to real people that you may know. So take a few seconds to see if you can match the eyes with the names. Here are the answers. So today, we are going to be focusing mainly on the function and structure of the human eye and the skin. But before we get into that detail, we need to go through some fundamental principles about irritability in order for you to move on to the eye and the skin. So today's objectives, we want to recap terminologies associated with irritability. We want to look at the structure and function of the human eye, correction of sight defects, and finally the structure and function of the human skin. So once you have done any biology at all, you should be familiar with the term Grimner, and we will be looking at the eye for irritability for today. So let us look at some terms that you will need to know concerning irritability. So stimulus. A stimulus is the internal or external change in the environment. So an internal change could be, for example, you're feeling hungry, there's germs in your system, you're feeling thirsty, and an external change could be, for a plant, could be light. An external change for humans could be you hear a sound outside, you smell KFC. Anything that is changed in your environment would be a stimulus. And your response will be your reaction to that stimulus. So for example, if you smell some chicken frying, you may be inclined to go and purchase. If you hear a baby crying, you may be inclined to go see what the problem is. So your response would be your reaction to the stimulus. Some other terms that you must know is receptor. Your receptors are the specialized cells which detect the stimulus and convert that stimulus into an electrical impulse. So for example, you would have specialized cells on your skin, in your eyes, your ears, so mostly your sense organs, and within your body as well. So these cells are going to detect any changes in the environment. And then they will convert, you must remember, they would convert that stimulus into an electrical impulse. And the effector would be the muscle or the gland that carries out the response. So if you're going to step over a puddle of water, the muscles in your feet are the ones which are going to receive the information to tell you to lift your leg up. And most importantly, your central nervous system, the hub of the entire nervous system, is comprised of your brain and spinal cord. So here we have an image showing your nervous system, and you have the central nervous system, which I just informed you consists of your brain and your spinal cord, which runs down your vertebral column. You also have a peripheral nervous system, which contains all your nerves that emanate from the spinal cord to all the other parts of your body. So you have central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord only, and your peripheral nervous system, number 2, which is all the other nerves that emanate from the spinal cord and to all other parts of your body. So a normal response happens in a very specific way. So let us say in this case the stimulus is you have a glass of water. So this is the stimulus here, and perhaps you are hungry. So the stimulus is this glass of water, and the receptors in your eye are going to detect this glass of water. So you have very specific receptors or very specific cells in the eyes which will detect or pick up the stimulus, and then remember that these receptors will convert that stimulus into an electrical impulse. So that electrical impulse is now going to be sent to a specific neuron, and it is going to follow a path from one neuron to the next to another, and then that electrical impulse is going to pass on to an effector. Remember, the effector is a gland or an organ that is going to carry out the response. So these neurons here, you're going to have to know about your sensory neuron, your relay neuron, which is found mainly in the brain, and spinal cord, which makes up your central nervous system, and you need to know about your motor neurons. But remember, we're doing a very, very quick recap. So your effectors now are going to receive the electrical impulse from the motor neuron, and then this effector is going to have some kind of response. So whether you're going to lift your arm up to pick up the glass, because your response is now to take up the glass to perhaps have a drink of water to help with the problem of the thirst. So this is for a normal response to a stimulus. And let us look at the three main types of neurons that you need to know about. So we have a sensory neuron, and we have the dendrites at the top. You have the cell body, because remember, your neurons are actually cells, so they have nucleus and all of that good stuff. And then you have your terminal ending on one end. So your electrical impulse will come from the receptor, which will be, let's say, somewhere here, and travel towards the cell body and towards the terminal end in your sensory neuron. You need to take a note of where your cell body is, because that is what's going to determine the difference mainly between the other neurons. Then you have the relay neuron, which is much shorter. Despite the diagram, your relay neurons are shorter. And if you come back here, your sensory neurons transport the electrical impulse from the receptor to the central nervous system. In the central nervous system, you have your relay neurons. Your relay neurons are also called interneurons. So you would see both words depending on which textbook you use. And your relay neurons are found only in your central nervous system. So these are the neurons that are going to transmit that electrical impulse to your brain or to other parts of your spinal cord. And then, so they're going to transmit the information in that direction. And then you have your motor neuron, which is your final neuron, which is going to take the electrical impulse from the relay neuron here and send it on towards the terminal ending here. And remember, at the end here, you are going to have either a muscle or a gland. So let us say the gland is your salivary gland. So you're going to secrete saliva. So this motor neuron will take the electrical impulse, carrying the information about what your response will be to your effector. So if it's a gland, you may secrete a hormone, for example, or you may secrete an enzyme. Or if it's a muscle, the muscle may contract, so you would walk away from something, or you would pick up something, or you might blink. It depends on what the gland or the muscle is in that case. However, so before we talked about the normal response to a stimulus, but there are cases where you would not want the delay that happens when information has to go to your brain for processing first. So let us say you step on a nail. it is not normal for the information to go to your brain first to tell you to lift your foot off the nail. So this is what we call a reflex arc is a response that is quite rapid. It does not include conscious thought, but it is a sort of like a reflex action to a stimulus. So for example, you will step on a pin and you will immediately lift your foot off the pin. Now after you've lifted your foot, you may look back to see, well, what is the issue, why you felt that sharp pain. So in a reflex arc, you have the same initial startup. So here is the stimulus. So it's a pain stimulus on the skin. The receptors are going to detect that stimulus, convert it into an electrical impulse, and send it down the sensory neuron and into your central nervous system. So here we have the CNS. Specifically, in this case, it would be your spinal cord. Why? Because you are stepping on a pin. Now the information is going to go quickly from the sensory neuron to your interneuron or your relay neuron, which is right here, and then the response is going to come just as quickly down the motor neuron and into the muscle here to tell you to lift your foot off the pin. Now it does not mean that your brain does not receive the information. Yes, other relay neurons are going to send the information to other relay neurons are going to send the information to your brain for processing. So what you may do after you've lifted your foot up, then you may process the information and then you may pick up the nail to prevent someone else from stepping on it, or you may cry out in pain. But the initial response does not require conscious thought. So that is why it is called a reflex arc. So you need to know the difference between a reflex arc and a normal response to a stimulus. I want to emphasize that in the reflex arc, it is not that the brain does not receive the information, but it just happens a fraction of a second after. Your initial response is always very quick and it is rapid. So for example, when the doctor knocks on your knee, the reflex arc goes in this direction, as you see in the diagram, and one time your foot will kick out. So for example, a fly is coming towards your eye, you will blink. So that's a reflex arc. We also have, before I move on this, I want to talk very, very quickly about learned responses. So for example, if you receive instruction to remove a hot macaroni pie from the oven, your mother has baked this pie in her lovely Pyrex dish. So you have on your mittens and you're moving the hot Pyrex dish from the oven to the table. But while you're moving it, the heat from the Pyrex dish starts burning your arm. Are you going to drop that Pyrex dish, break your mother good Pyrex dish, and damage a very good pie, ruin a very good pie? Or are you going to hold strain for an extra second and put the dish down safely? And that is what we call a learned response based on experience. So you may have dropped the pie when you are a smaller child maybe, but you know the consequences of dropping that pie, right? Your mom will be very, very angry with that broken dish and a lost pie. So in a learned response, you will subdue the impulse to drop and run, but you will hold that pie just for a few extra seconds and put the dish down safely. So that's what you call a learned response. You are not going to do what is instinct, but you would have learned from past experiences to override this reflex action and bear the consequences for a few more seconds and get the response that you want, which is to have a pie to eat. So let us now go into details about the function and structure of the human eye. So here we have an image of the internal structure of the human eye, and this is a longitudinal section. So we have cut the eye in this direction and we're looking at the internal structures. So we want to start with the front. this will be the front of the eye, what you actually see. So your eyelashes will be, you know, somewhere around here. And this is the curvature in the eye. Remember, your eye is well into your orbital socket or the structure of the skull, right? So most of what we see is behind here. So we have the cornea. The cornea is this curved structure right in the front here of the eye, and it has a protective function over the softer tissues behind it. The conjunctiva is this very thin transparent layer that covers and protects the cornea. That is the part that gets inflamed when you have conjunctiva, or what we call red eye or pink eye. Next is the iris. The iris is this bit of muscle here, and you have two. 1, 2. So the function of the iris is to control the amount of light entering into the eye. And the space between the two iris here, that is what is called the pupil. So the pupil lets in light into the eye. So if you were to look at my fingers, you will imagine that my index fingers are the iris, and the space between here is the pupil. So the iris would control the amount of light that enters the eye, and the space here, it just allows light to get in. Now the structures behind these first 4 areas here would consist of this region right here. Here we have the ciliary muscles, or ciliary body. You will see ciliary body as well. And these muscles, because they are muscles, what do muscles do? They would contract and relax. And they are going to bring about changes in this structure up here. Then we have suspensory ligaments and the lens. So here we have the lens, which is situated behind the iris. And the suspensory ligaments are, as the words say, they are the ones that are suspending or holding the lens in place, and the muscle controls the entire movement of this structure here with the lens suspensory ligament. Now, suspensory ligaments, they are not muscles, so they do not contract and relax. What are the terms that we would use for suspensory ligaments? We will say they get taut or they slacken, because they are not muscles. Your muscles will contract or relax. Okay, so let us look at the back of the eye and the more of the internal structures. So we have this white layer that covers the eye, and that is the white of the eye that you normally see. It's called the sclera, and it has a protective function. It is a very tough structure that protects the internal structures of the eye. Then we have the choroid. If you notice, you have a red section here, a black section, and then the white section for the sclera. So the choroid is this blackened region right here. That is the center layer, and that is filled with blood vessels, and that blackened area prevents reflection inside of the eye. You would not want light bouncing all over inside of the eye. So the choroid prevents reflection inside of the eye. And the third layer is the retina. This retina is represented by this red section here. So we have 3 layers: the sclera, the choroid, and the retina. And the retina is the area on which the image is formed. The retina is also rich with blood vessels, and most importantly, the retina has your receptors. We spoke about receptors before. The receptors on your retina are your cones and your rods. these are specialized cells which are going to detect any change in the environment. So your cones help you to see in color, and your rods help you to see in black and white. Now the fovea is a very specific region on the retina, and it is packed with cones. So that is where your strongest vision or your focus is on your retina. So it's packed with cones, and it is also obviously a receptor region. Then we have the blind spot. This area here we have is called the optic nerve. So all the nerve endings from throughout the retina are going to come and be concentrated or bundled together and sent towards the brain for processing of whatever it is that you're looking at. And your blind spot is that central region in the back at the top of the optic nerve, and it has absolutely no rods or no cones. So it is not a light sensitive region. There are no rods, no cones, and anything that falls on that region will not be seen. So the image of your eye from the front, what you actually see when you look at yourself in the mirror, when you look at someone, is the pupil. And we spoke about the pupil here. Remember the space between the iris. So here is the pupil. So it's that blackened region. It's actually a hole or a space. And then you have the iris. This is the pigmented muscle that gives you your eye color. Right? So it is colored, and it is made up of muscle. And of course, the white of your eye is your sclera. Okay, so how do we see? The process of sight is complicated, but it is also very simple. Just the same principle upon which a camera has been created on. So when you're looking at an object, for example, this candle, light is going to leave the object and enter into your eye. So it passes through the cornea here, and there is very slight refraction through the cornea, and it enters through the pupil and onto your lens. At the lens, the light is going to be refracted. So we're getting a bit of physics here. Refracted or bent, so that the light focuses on the retina at the back. So the object here is inverted, as you can see, what we will say upside down. So the flame is on top here, what you're actually seeing, but down here on the retina, the flame is facing the other direction. So let's go through that again. Light from the object goes through the cornea, through the pupil, hits on the lens. The lens will refract or bend the light at the perfect angle so that it hits onto the retina, or the fovea specifically at the back. Now what happens if light hits other parts of the retina? That's fine. That is what you're going to call your peripheral vision. Your peripheral vision is not as sharp as when the light falls on the fovea. And what do we mean by that? If you're staring at the screen right now, you're going to see all this beautiful diagram about the eye. But from the corners of your eye, you can still make out other things that's going on in the room or wherever you are. So that is your peripheral vision, but it is not going to be very sharp. It's not going to be in focus. What is in focus is whatever light that falls on the fovea here. So light that falls on other parts of the retina, remember you have receptor cells, your cones and your rods, which will detect the light falling on them and still send the image onto the optic nerve and then to your brain for interpretation. Just remember that anything falling on the fovea is the sharpest image that you will have. and the image is inverted, but when that information goes to your brain will process it and turn the image the right way. So you will think that you are seeing things right side up. So all of this is what normally happens. Now, accommodation is a concept that you need to understand thoroughly. What is accommodation? This is a reflex mechanism, so you have no control, by which light rays from an object is focused on the retina, but it depends on that object's distance from the eyes and the amount of available light. So for example, when you are studying or when you're in the classroom, you would write something in your book and then you would look up at the board. So your eyes have to constantly be adjusting or accommodating for that change in distance that you are looking at. So you're looking at something close here and then you focus on something far up again. So your eye has to accommodate for that constant movement. And it is a reflex action. You don't have to think about it. The eye does what it has to do when it's changing its sight range. So it involves two things. You need to adjust the size of the pupil and you need to adjust the refraction of the light rays. So one of the processes in accommodation we said was adjustment of pupil size. So if you look at your pupil, or what you should understand about your pupil is that it is controlled by the iris. So in the iris, you have two types of muscles. You have circular muscles, which obviously go in a circular pattern around the pupil, and you have radial muscles. These are the ones which obviously radiate from the pupil. So they go in this sort of fashion. So I found these really interesting images and I thought that I should share them with you because they are like close-up images of a person's eye. So here you can actually see the cornea, and here is the pupil, and so you're seeing the iris here. So here is the iris, and you can see those muscles that the iris is made up of. So you can see the radial muscles, and you can just almost make out the circular and the radial muscles in the image here. So I needed to look at this picture and look closely at what happens to her pupils when light is shone into it. So did you see that, how quickly the pupils got smaller? So you would have seen the doctor, I'm assuming it's a doctor. And for those of you who are going to go into the medical profession very shortly, these are the kind of things that you're going to be looking for. So if a person is able to accommodate quickly for light being shone into their eye, it will indicate that there's good brain activity going on. So the pupils, when you shine a bright light into it, or when there's light available, the pupils get smaller. The brighter the light, of course, the smaller the pupils will go. So how does that happen? So imagine that this rubber band, so for that to happen, you have to have the muscles working to close that pupil. So imagine that this rubber band is like the eye or the iris. So the hole is the pupil and the actual band will make up the circular muscles. My fingers are going to be the radial muscles. So if I want my pupil size to get smaller, would I want my radial muscles to contract, or do I want the circular muscles to contract? Obviously, if you want the pupil to get smaller, you would want the circular muscles to contract and make that hole smaller. So that is exactly what happens. When there is bright light, your circular muscles will contract. The circular muscles will contract. And obviously the antagonistic muscles, which will be your radial muscles, they will relax. So the pupil will constrict or become smaller, and less light will enter the eye. You don't want too much light entering the eye. That is going to cause problems on your retina. So once again, bright light, you want the pupils to get smaller, and so the circular muscles will contract and the radial muscles will relax. In dim light, when you want to bring in as much light as possible, you would want the radial muscles to contract to open up that pupil. So in dim light, because you want to bring in as much light as possible from ambient conditions, we have the opposite happening. The radial muscles now will be the ones to contract while the circular muscles will relax. So this is going to result in the pupil dilating or getting bigger and more light entering into the eye. So the second form of accommodation, or the second process, the first one was altering or adjusting the amount of light by changing the iris and the size of the pupil. The second one has to do with refraction of the light. Now refraction occurs when light passes from one medium to the other. So when light leaves the environment and enters into your eye, that is two different media. So once that happens, the light will bend. And in the eye, there are 2 points where the light can bend, or 2 points where we have refraction happening. We talked about the cornea, which is 1, and the lens, which is 2. Now, you can't do anything about the cornea because, one, the refractive index at the cornea is very small, and also the cornea is very stable. It doesn't change. So the only area where we can adjust the refraction is by the lens. Remember, the lens is controlled by the suspensory ligaments here and the ciliary muscle and the ciliary body there. So by adjusting what's going on with those muscles and ligaments, you can adjust the lens in your, well, not you, it is an involuntary process, but the lens of the eyes can be adjusted, and that is going to affect how much the light bends into the eye. So let us look at the distances of objects. If an object is close to the eye, as in the example of the red arrow, when light leaves that object and is entering into the eye, we want the image of that arrow to be formed on the retina at the back here. So because the object is close, what we want is the light to bend more or to converge sooner at the back of the eye, as opposed to if the object is very far away, as in the case of this green arrow here. Because the light is coming from a further distance, we don't want the light to continue bending, otherwise the image will form before the retina. In this case, we want the light to not bend as steep or as soon, so that the image will form on the retina. And the only way to do that is to adjust the size of the lens. So you can either make the lens bulge or get thinner, and that is going to affect how much the light is going to refract onto the retina. So here we have an example. So here is a near object, a cup of coffee. And remember, we said if the object is near, we want the light to converge or bend more and let the focal or the focal length is much shorter, so we want it to converge on the retina, specifically the fovea at the back of the eye. So the only way to get that bending more is to get the lens quote-unquote fatter or bulge or more convex. You need to use this term. You want it to be more convex. So how do we get that done? The ciliary muscles will contract here and the suspensory ligaments will slacken. When the suspensory ligaments slacken, so here are the ligaments here in this region, when they slacken, the lens bulge. So they get rounder, fatter, and because they are rounder and fatter, the light is going to bend more and focus onto the retina at the back. On the flip side, when you look at something far away, so you're seeing the cheetah or the animal or what have you, the dog, coming at you from a distance, what does your eye do, or how does the eye accommodate for that distance? The light is coming in from a far distance, so what you want is for the light not to bend too much, otherwise the image will form before the retina. So how do we get that done? It has to be the opposite of what happens when you're looking near. The ciliary muscles are going to relax, so here are the muscles relaxing, and the suspensory ligaments are going to tighten. So when these suspensory ligaments tighten, they're going to pull the lens thinner, make them longer and thinner, and so the light does not bend as steeply as in the case when you're looking at something near. So the light bends not as steep, and so you have the image falling where it is supposed to fall. So this is accommodation for distance of object, and before we spoke about accommodation for the amount of light. Remember, this is an involuntary action and you don't have any control over it. So let us go this over again. When an object is near, so we're looking at this column here, you want the light to refract more. So in order for that to happen, the lens must get thicker and shorter. So you would say you want the lens to get more convex. So you want the lens to become more convex, more rounded. And for that to happen, the ciliary muscles must contract, and therefore the suspensory ligaments will slacken. So you need to know this. As opposed to when an object is far, what do we want? We want less refraction. We don't want the light bending too steeply and preventing the image from falling on the retina. So we want less refraction. So for that to happen, the lens must be thinner and longer. And so for that to occur, the ciliary muscles must relax, and the ligaments are the ones which will get taut and pull the lens, elongate the lens then. So the suspensory ligaments will have to get taut.